Hi guys, my name's Emma Tortolo and I'm going to talk to you today about three middle grade books that are all about friendship. And I'm going to start by reading a quote from a classic book that I think you might recognize, but I'm going to read it first and then see if you can figure it out yourself. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. "That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that." So that you might have recognized is from Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. And this isn't actually one of the books I'm going to talk about today, but there were two reasons why I wanted to read that quote today. Number one is I think that's one of the best descriptions of friendship I've ever read. You might be able to see this is a book I've had since childhood. I've read it many times, and I just love that quote. And I love what it says about how Charlotte's friendship helped Wilbur become a better person and a better friend and a better pig. And the second reason I wanted to read this quote is that the first book I am going to talk to you about today is called George by Alex Gino, and Charlotte's Web plays a very important role in George. So let's talk about George. George is a 10-year-old transgender girl, and she just wants everyone to see her for who she really is and who she feels like inside. Everybody looks at George and they see a little boy, and when they talk about George, they say his and him and he, but that's not what George feels like. George feels like a girl, and so in the book, George is described as she, and you will come to think of George as a she. It just that's who she is, and something that seems like it should be a very complicated idea in this story becomes pretty simple. And I just want to read an excerpt from you so you can hear it in George's own words. "George, whatever it is, you can tell me." Mum took George's hand in one of her own and covered it with the other. "Whatever happens in your life, you can share it, and I will love you. You will always be my little boy, and that will never change. Even when you grow up to be an old man, I will still love you as my son." George opened her lips, but there were no words in her mouth, and only one thought in her brain. No. George knew that Mum was trying to help, but George didn't have a normal problem. She wasn't scared of snakes. She hadn't failed a math test. She was a girl, and no one knew it. "Mom, could I have some chocolate milk?" "Oh, Gigi, of course." She went to the fridge. In the weeks after Dad had left the house, Mum had given George a glass of chocolate milk every night before bed. Neither of them would say anything. Neither of them had anything to say. But these were some of George's favorite memories, just sitting there being with Mum, knowing she would never leave. George wouldn't finish her chocolate milk until she was ready for Mum to kiss her goodnight. Then Mum would take the nearly empty glass and turn it over above her mouth for one last drop. George always made sure to leave that last thick sip. Now Mum came back to the table with a full glass of chocolate milk, frothy from a fresh stirring. The sweetness filled George's mouth. She focused her eyes firmly on the creamy bubbles now resting halfway down the glass. She stared at the foam for a minute and then down the second half. She felt more than tasted it, coldness running down her throat. Then she handed the glass to Mum, who tipped it over her tongue for that final drop. The sweetness of the chocolate milk had coated George's tongue, covering the words sitting on its tip. Someday, somehow, George would have to tell Mum that she was a girl, but this was not that day. And as for how, she had no idea. So the how, Charlotte's Web actually plays a big role in that. The main plot of this book revolves around the fact that the school play is coming up and the class is going to perform Charlotte's Web. And the teacher reads Charlotte's Web out loud to George's class, and she falls in love with the story. She falls in love with Charlotte and with Charlotte and Wilbur's friendship. She really identifies with Charlotte, and she actually cries during class when the teacher reads that passage aloud, the passage I just read for you. And the boys, of course, snicker and make fun of George because they see George as a boy, and boys aren't supposed to cry, especially at books. And the teacher's quote in response, I love. The teacher says, "To be honest, I'm not sure what I think of a person who doesn't cry at the end of Charlotte's Web," and who couldn't agree with that. But even this teacher, who's so sweet and kind and seems to have so much understanding for George, even she doesn't understand when it comes time for the auditions. And George wants to audition for the role of Charlotte because George is a girl and George wants to play a girl's part, and the teacher says, no, you're a boy, George. You can be Templeton the Rat, or you can be any of the other male characters. You're a boy. You have to audition for a boy's role. Um, Nobody gets it until, fortunately, Kelly, who is George's best friend, she finally is able to see who George is, and she very sweetly says, well, if you think you're a girl, then I think you're a girl. And it's Kelly who helps George come up with a plan for how they're going to help everybody at school see George for who she really is, and especially George's family. And there's some very funny moments that tie these two books together along the way. You might remember that in Charlotte's Web, the phrase "some pig" is one of the phrases that Charlotte weaves into her web to help save Wilbur the pig. And so George manages to print the words "some jerk" on the back of the t-shirt belonging to a bully who has not been very nice about George or Charlotte the spider. So anyway, you'll have to read the book yourself to find out exactly how Kelly's plan goes forward. But what I really like about the book is how it shows you that even if you feel like your teachers don't understand you or your parents have no clue what's going on in your head, if you just have one friend who sees what's going on with you and understands you and doesn't judge you, it's amazing how powerful that can be. And also by tying in Charlotte's Web into this book, you see that the best friendships really are universal, and that it can be a friendship between a girl and a transgender girl, or a pig and a spider. It doesn't matter. Friendship is friendship. And so speaking of friendships amongst animals, the next book I want to tell you about is called The One and Only Ivan by Katherine Applegate. And this is about a gorilla named Ivan who lives in a shopping mall circus along with his two friends, an elephant named Stella, who's also part of the circus, and a stray dog named Bob. Now, the author, Katherine Applegate, she actually based this novel on the true story. There was a real-life gorilla named Ivan who was kept in a shopping mall for 30 years until there was a huge public outcry, and the public insisted that he be moved to a zoo where he'd be taken better care of. And this real-life elephant became famous for his finger painting, and he used to sign his finger paints with a thumbprint of paint. But sadly, the real-life Ivan didn't have any friends. He was completely isolated in the shopping mall circus. But fortunately, this Ivan, he has two great friends, the elephant and the stray dog I told you about. And this book is told from Ivan's point of view, which means we get to spend the whole book inside the head of a gorilla, which is kind of awesome. And some of the funniest parts of the book are the way that Ivan the gorilla sees humans, because he's behind glass all day and humans walk past, they knock on the glass, they pull gorilla faces, they try to pound their chest to make him pound his chest. But meanwhile, Ivan is looking right back at them, thinking that humans are kind of funny too. So that's this excerpt I'd like to read to you. Our circus doesn't migrate. We sit where we are like an old beast too tired to push on. After our show, humans forage through the stores. A store is where humans buy things they need to survive. At the Big Top Mall, some stores sell new things. Things like balloons and t-shirts and caps to cover the gleaming heads of humans. Some stores sell old things, things that smell dusty and damp and long forgotten. All day I watch humans scurry from store to store. They pass their green paper dry as old leaves and smelling of 1,000 hands, back and forth and back again. They hunt frantically, stalking, pushing, grumbling. Then they leave, clutching bags filled with things, bright things, soft things, big things. But no matter how full the bags, they always come back for more. Humans are clever indeed. They spin pink clouds you can eat. They build domains with flat waterfalls. But they are lousy hunters. Kind of funny, thinking of your shopping mall habits as witnessed by a gorilla. Anyway, Ivan has done mostly a really good job up until a certain point in his life of forgetting that he came from the jungle, because that's the best way to survive, is just to not think of life outside of the shopping mall. And when he's bored, he watches TV, but he doesn't really get mad. And when the visitors to his cage do this with their chests, Ivan tells us, the readers, that he doesn't do that because that's what gorillas do when they are mad, because they are protecting their family, and Ivan doesn't have a family to protect. But then one day, his friend Stella gets really sick. Her foot is infected, because elephants aren't meant to stand around in shopping malls all day. And she gets so sick, she knows she's going to die. And the circus owner brings in a new baby elephant called Ruby, and Stella understands that Ruby's there to replace her. And she's really fond of this new baby elephant, and she doesn't want this baby elephant to have the life that she did, and she doesn't want this baby elephant to die in a shopping mall like she's about to. So right before she dies, Stella makes Ivan promise that he will find a way to get Ruby to a better place, to help this baby elephant live in a zoo where she'll have a better life. So Ivan promises because he's a good friend, and that's what good friends do. They want to make their friends happy, especially when they're dying. But Ivan has no idea how he's going to keep this promise. Now he has a reason to pound his chest. He has a family that he wants to protect, this baby elephant. But he's a gorilla, and his friend is a stray dog, and how are they supposed to help an elephant escape from a shopping mall and get to a zoo? Well, I'll give you one hint. Ivan, just like his real-life counterpart, happens to know how to use finger paints, so that might just be involved. But you'll have to read the book to find out yourself if it actually works. So the final book I want to talk to you about today is called Billionaire Boy by David Walliams, and the main character in this could actually learn a lot about friendship from Ivan the gorilla, not to mention George and his friend. So the main character is named Joe Spud, and the author does a great job with funny names in this book. He's 12 years old and he's the richest boy in England, and the reason he's the richest boy in England is because his dad invented a special kind of wet-dry toilet paper, which means there are a lot of toilet-related jokes in this book. So if you find toilet-related jokes funny, I think you will enjoy this book. So this Joe has everything he could possibly want. He has his own movie theater. He has his own bowling alley. He has a couch that seats 1,000 people. He has his own butler who also happens to be an orangutan. And when he gets in trouble, his dad says, "Joe, go to your rooms," because he has a whole suite of rooms. But what he doesn't have is any friends. And unfortunately, he doesn't know how to make friends because his dad has taught him his whole life that money can buy you everything. And Joe's dad does this for Joe. He pays off his teachers to give Joe good grades. And when the teachers don't give good grades, he pays the school to fire those teachers. And he even hires a little girl who pretends to be Joe's friend. But then Joe realizes he finds this out and he tries to make his own friends. And he realizes he doesn't know how. And he just realizes that friendship can't be bought by money, but he doesn't know how to be a friend. So along the way, through some very funny mishaps, he kind of learns what it means to be a friend. This book reminds me a lot of Roald Dahl. If you like books by Roald Dahl, like The BFG or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think you'll like this. And one of the things the author's particularly good at doing, he's really good at coming up with funny lists. There's a very funny list in this book, which is a list of made-up bad words. Some of them that I really liked are Jufa, Lotcrack, Plume-Fizz, Fedger, Smagger, and Dangle Spangles. And then when Joe meets a new teacher whose name is Mr. Bread, and he says, "You can call me Peter," and they realize, Peter Bread, they come up with a whole list of names that you really wouldn't want if you're going to be a teacher, like Marcus Absent, Doris Closed, and Doris Open. Anyway, the excerpt I want to read you is another very funny list. This is a list of things Joe and his dad like to do with £50 notes. Now, £50, probably worth about $75 or $80. Here are a few things Joe and his dad would do with £50 notes. Light them instead of bits of old newspaper to get the barbecue going. Keep a pad of them by the telephone and use them as post-it notes. Line the hamster cage with handfuls of them and then throw them out after a week when they began to smell of hamster wee. Let the hamster use one as a towel after it's had its shower. Make paper hats out of them to wear on Christmas Day. Blow their noses on them. Spit chewed up chewing gum into them before crumpling them and placing them in the hand of a butler, who would then place them in the hand of a footman, who would then put them in the hand of a maid, who would put them in the bin. Bin is an English word for trash can. Anyway, if you want to read the rest of that list and a bunch of other funny lists, you'll have to read the book yourself. So, going back to these three books, just to go through them again, we have George by Alex Gino, The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate, and Billionaire Boy by David Walliams. And they all have friendship at their heart, whether it's a friend who can see you for who you really are, or a friend who keeps a promise for you, or a friend who just shows you that sometimes having someone to share a candy bar with can feel as good as $1 billion or even £1 billion.